Hey everyone, it's Kong again, and here's another episode of Should You Summon. As always, I'm going to be presenting high-level overviews using these 4 criteria to help you decide whether this banner is worth your hard-earned vouchers and crystals. So let's get right into this Destiny banner featuring Vincent, Zerida, and Clarett, running from September 9th to the 22nd. As a Destiny banner, the first SSR is guaranteed to be one of these 3 that you don't already have. After you pull your first SSR from this banner, or if you already have all 3 of these characters, then it's treated like a normal raid-up banner, and that means you have an 80% chance to pull someone from the banner, and a 20% chance to get any random off-banner character from the regular summoning pool. And with this one, we can get availability out of the way in advance. These 3 characters don't show up on the predicted banner schedule, meaning none of them will be headlining a banner before February at the earliest. Zerida and Clarett were on a version of this banner last year, and Vincent basically just joined them to make it a Destiny, so it's certainly possible that this entire banner will just come back in 6 months or so. But we'll have to wait and see. Okay, let's get started with Vincent. Vincent is a physical AoE unit who does extra AoE damage based on how far he moves. When he dies, he hits enemies within 3 blocks with an AoE explosion. His 3-cost skill kind of reverse chain hooks him towards a target and does an AoE burst when he gets there. And it also passively brings him back to life with 50% HP if he dies, and this still triggers his talent explosion, of course. So kind of like Wheeler's 3C, this is basically just a way to give you the on-death effects of his talent without actually having to die. His unique armor, coming to global servers in November, increases his crit rate for every tile he moves, and strips a buff from enemies when he lands a crit. He's a member of Dark Reincarnation, buffed by Bozil and Licorice, Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida and Epsilon, and Empire's Honor, buffed by Bernhardt, Leon, Lance, and Rosenseal. For bonds, he actually doesn't roadblock anyone else's bonds yet, but he needs Ilusha for his defensive bond and Kruger for his attack bond. For content, in PvE, he's on faction for Leviar, Scylla, and Valkyrie in the Eternal Temple, and Jormungandr, Fenrir, and Sleipnir in Ancient Beckoning. He'll work in PvE in the same way that any unit works in PvE. If you like him, and you put him in the right team, you'll be able to clear content. It's PvE. On the PvP side, you'll see him show up in a fair number of AoE-based teams. He does have a lot of meta buffers, and getting hit with AoEs is annoying, and having a revive gives him a little bit of staying power. His upcoming unique equipment helps him do what he already does even more effectively. Even though it's on a long cycle, it's also worth mentioning that in the last instance of the Magic Tower auto chess mode, he was a very useful character for that. It's possible that the meta changes slightly with each new instance of that event, but he'll probably still be good. Next up we have Zerida, who's an assassin who relies on critical hits to one-shot enemies through guard. Her talent boosts her crit rate at all times, and then further boosts her crit rate and crit damage, reduces damage taken, and increases mobility if you end your turn outside the danger zone. Her 3-cost skill is basically a toggle between her normal Alhazard and Killing Blow skills, opening up a slot for you to run something else. This is the bread and butter skill that people usually use to kill their opponents through guard, but it does mean she has some setup time. She also has a unique helm that heals her and removes a debuff if she ends her turn away from allies. She's a member of Dark Reincarnation, buffed by Bozil and Licorice, Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida and Epsilon, and Mythical Realm, buffed by Gizaroth and the Sage of the Trees. If you have no adjacent allies within one space, her faction buff for Meteor Strike increases damage dealt by 10%, lets you move 2 spaces after defeating an enemy, and heals 20% at the end of your action. For bonds, she unlocks the attack bonds for Farakia, Yulia, and the upcoming new character, Vincent. She actually doesn't need anyone to unlock her own bonds, you just need to upgrade her classes. For content, in PvE, she's technically on faction for Leviar and Scylla in the Eternal Temple, and Jormungandr and Fenrir in Ancient Beckoning, but you don't tend to see her used very often in these modes. She's designed more for erasing targets than piling damage on bosses. For that reason though, you do see her a lot in joint battles and some challenges. In PvP, she used to be one of the game's marquee PvP characters, but she's been presented with a couple of problems lately that make things a little more difficult for her. For one, there are way more long-range threats nowadays, which means she doesn't dominate map control like she used to. It's not as easy to keep her hide-and-seek buff up, and instead of zoning enemies out, she finds herself being pushed to the sidelines instead. On top of that, there are now more enemies that make it more difficult to maximize her damage, for example by preventing critical hits, without which her kill potential is much lower. She's still good, but you can't just plug her into your box and take for granted that you're going to get some kills anymore. Finally, we have Clarett. Clarett's a highly mobile, single-target physical DPS. Her talent boosts her damage and reduces her damage taken, but more importantly, it stocks up any unused movement for your next turn. At 6 stars, if you end your turn without moving, you can get a full 5 additional movement for your next turn. Her 3-cost skill is basically a fancy version of Roar with some extra effects, dispelling buffs before combat, speeding up cooldown on a kill, and boosting damage based on her extra talent mobility. Her unique helm is kind of baffling, giving her bonus damage and damage resistance when she gets attacked. For a player phase-oriented cannonball type unit, this just isn't very helpful. Maybe the idea was that it would protect her from retribution after charging into the enemy formation, but it won't. It won't. She's a member of Yeless Legends buffed by Landius and Sigma, Meteor Strike buffed by Zerida and Epsilon, and Princess Alliance buffed by Luna, Shelfaniel, and Christiane. For bonds, she unlocks the attack bonds for Alfred and the upcoming new character Werner. No, not that Werner, the new version of Sigma who's recovering from Gizeroff's cyborg experimentation and going by his original name again. For her own bonds, she needs Luna for her defensive bond and Sigma for her attack bond. For content, in PvE, she's on faction for Leviar, Scylla, and Phoenix in the Eternal Temple, and her long-range slaying ability could make her useful for mob cleanup on the latter too. In Ancient Beckoning, she's on faction for Needhog, and she's actually one of the stronger options against Jormungandr. In general use PvE, she could of course be helpful as a treasure hunter. In PvP, she dropped off for a while, but if our meta follows the Chinese server through a period of relatively less reliance on tanks, then she could come back as an option in single-target rush boxes. Her talent, allowing her to stack up a turn's worth of additional mobility, is always helpful in longer range teams in general. Alright, here's the quick and dirty. We have Vincent, who's a physical AoE who explodes when he dies, and he's a top tier unit for the Magical Tower auto chess mode. We have Zerida, who's a speedy physical assassin. She has one of the faction buffs for Meteor Strike, and she unlocks the attack bonds for Farakia, Yulia, and Itham. Finally, we have Clarett, who's a highly mobile flying DPS who unlocks the attack bonds for Alfred and Werner. And by extremely popular demand, the Notes for Noobs section is back once again, so if you're a newer player with a newer account, or you just don't mind a verdict-style summary to help you digest all that information, should you summon? Zerida has a faction buff for Meteor Strike, the only one until Epsilon comes out, and she unlocks important attack bonds for Yulia and Itham, the latter of whom is going to be an OP meta character for PvP. She's a good, useful character. Summon for her if you can. Clarett is also about to become important as a meta PvP bond unlocker since the upcoming new Werner is looking pretty promising. Vincent is more of a niche character who can be useful in the right box. I wouldn't say it's a priority to dip into this banner specifically for him, but if you have a Destiny guarantee, then why not? Finally, just my usual reminder about upcoming banners. Next week we have a couple of Destiny banners lined up, one featuring Lambda, Gizeroff, and Sigma, and the other featuring the classic Empire lineup of Elwyn, Leon, and Bernhardt. Last month, one of our scheduled Destiny banners just disappeared into thin air, so it's a good reminder that none of this is actually set in stone. The week after that, with the beginning of the next Echo of Light cycle, will be the launch of the new original characters Mew and Epsilon. And we'll have more to say about them in their episode of Should You Summon, so stay tuned for that. And on that note, that's it for this episode. I hope you found this video and these summaries helpful enough to warrant a little thumbs up, and let me know in the comments if you plan on summoning here and what kind of luck you ended up having. Vincent is my Destiny guarantee, so I'm gonna summon until I get him, and just hope that he decides to make it pretty inexpensive for me. As I mentioned in my summoning plans video, I do have 100 summons set aside specifically for him, but fingers crossed it doesn't come to that. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next Should You Summon. Extra special thanks, of course, to our Langrisser tier channel members for generously supporting the channel directly. Levitt, Derek Gunderson, Kyle Greer-Brown, William Householder, Kate Soon, Jared Portela, Eden Seal, and Ilymirius. Thanks so much, folks, for your contributions.